October 14th, 1943. Schweinfurt, Germany. Oberst Gunther Rall stands at the window of Luftwaffe operations headquarters in Berlin, watching smoke rise from distant fires. The telephone call he received 11 minutes ago has left him physically cold, despite the radiator hissing in the corner. In the past 72 hours, the American 8th Air Force has destroyed approximately 600 German fighter aircraft, not damaged, not temporarily out of service. Destroyed, burned on the ground, shot down over the Reich, smashed into German soil by pilots who never had a chance to learn how to survive. Rall knows what this number means. He has been calculating it in his head since the moment the operations officer finished reading the preliminary casualty report. 600 fighters represents roughly 1/4 of the entire Luftwaffe fighter force defending Germany. 1/4 gone in 3 days, and the Americans are already planning their next raid. But the numbers tell only half the story. The other half, the part that makes Rall's hands shake slightly as he lights a cigarette, is what happened 60 hours ago in a conference room 4 floors below where he now stands. Reich Marshal Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, made a decision that would alter the course of the air war over Europe. He ordered the immediate transfer of 300 frontline fighters from Germany to the Eastern Front. The timing was not coincidental. The order came in the middle of the American offensive, while German fighters were being destroyed faster than factories could replace them, while the industrial heart of the Reich was burning under American bombs. Göring stripped the defense of Germany to reinforce operations against the Soviet Union, and in doing so, he handed the Americans air superiority over the Reich. Rall understands military necessity. He has flown combat missions on both fronts. He knows the Eastern Front is consuming men and material at rates that seem impossible to sustain. But he also knows that what happened in the past 72 hours over Germany was not simply a defeat. It was the moment the mathematics of the air war became unsolvable. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The 72 hours that changed everything began not with combat, but with weather. On October 11th, 1943, meteorologists at 8th Air Force headquarters in England studied pressure systems moving across northern Europe and saw a window, 3 days, perhaps 4, of clear skies over Germany. Clear skies meant bomber crews could see their targets. Clear skies meant precision attacks on the factories producing the aircraft and ball bearings that kept the Luftwaffe flying. Clear skies meant the Americans would come in force. Major General Frederick Anderson, the 8th Air Force's director of operations, had been waiting for this weather window for weeks. His target list was already prepared: Schweinfurt, at the ball bearing center; Leipzig, aircraft production; Münster, transport infrastructure. These were not random selections. They were pressure points, industrial choke points, where a few tons of high explosive could create cascading failures throughout the German war machine. Anderson's planning documents, later captured by Allied intelligence, reveal the thinking behind the 72-hour offensive. The Americans knew German fighter strength was concentrated in specific areas. They knew transfer of aircraft between fronts took time, required logistics, created temporary vulnerabilities. If they could hit hard enough, fast enough, during a brief window when German defenses were being reorganized, they might inflict damage from which the Luftwaffe could not recover. They were correct, but not in the way they anticipated. On the German side, the situation was already deteriorating before the first American bomber crossed the coastline. Oberst Rall's counterpart at Luftflotte Reich, the air command responsible for defending Germany, was General Lieutenant Joseph Schmid. Schmid's situation reports from early October paint a picture of an air defense system under unsustainable strain. Fighter availability fluctuated wildly. Losses from combat had to be balanced against transfer requirements to support ground operations in Russia. Pilot training continued to erode. In September 1943, replacement pilots arriving at frontline fighter squadrons in Germany had an average of 112 hours total flight time. By October, that figure had dropped to 96 hours. Some pilots arrived with as few as 60 hours in operational aircraft. Schmid's reports noted with increasing alarm that inexperienced pilots were not surviving long enough to become experienced pilots. The average lifespan of a replacement fighter pilot, measured from the day he arrived at his first operational squadron until he was killed, wounded, or missing, was approximately 6 weeks. 6 weeks. In that time, a pilot might fly 12 to 15 combat missions if he was lucky. If he survived those missions, his chances of surviving the war improved dramatically, but most did not survive. Most died before they learned the skills that kept men alive. The Americans understood none of these internal German problems. They did not need to. Their strategy was based on mathematics that transcended intelligence reports: destroy more aircraft than Germany could produce, force the Luftwaffe to defend everywhere simultaneously, maintain offensive pressure until the defender's system collapses from exhaustion. It was industrial warfare distilled to its essential logic. The side with more resources would win. Everything else was detailed. October 12th, 1943, 8:47 a.m. Over the North Sea, 2nd Lieutenant James Goodson, pilot of a P-47, Thunderbolt fighter with the 4th Fighter Group, watches the bomber stream forming up ahead of him. The B-17 Flying Fortresses are assembling into their defensive boxes, massive 4-engine bombers bristling with half-inch caliber machine guns, each aircraft carrying up to 6,000 pounds of high-explosive bombs. Goodson counts the bombers: 24 aircraft in a group, 13 groups visible from his position, over 300 bombers, and this is just the first wave. Behind them, somewhere in the overcast skies over East Anglia, another 200 bombers are forming up for the second wave, targeting different objectives. It is the largest daylight bombing raid the 8th Air Force has ever attempted. The Thunderbolt Goodson flies is a magnificent machine. 7 tons of aircraft wrapped around a 2,000 horsepower radial engine, 8 50 caliber machine guns, top speed over 400 miles per hour. But it has one critical limitation: range. With standard internal fuel, the P-47 can escort the bombers only to the German border, perhaps slightly beyond. Then the fighters must turn back, leaving the bombers to continue alone into the heart of Germany. Goodson knows what happens to unescorted bombers over Germany. Everyone knows. The Luftwaffe attacks with single-engine fighters, twin-engine destroyers, rockets, cannon. The bomber formations defend themselves with mass defensive fire, but they take casualties, heavy casualties. On some raids, the loss rate reaches 15%. 15%. That means 1 bomber in 7 does not come home. 10 men per bomber. 70 men died or were captured for every 7 bombers lost. But today is different. Today, the bombers will not be entirely alone. A new fighter is joining the escort force, the P-51 Mustang, with its Rolls-Royce Merlin engine and internal fuel augmented by drop tanks. The Mustang can fly all the way to the target and back. It can stay with the bombers. The number of Mustangs available in October 1943 is small, barely 2 dozen, but it represents a change in capability that will alter the air war fundamentally. The German defenders do not yet know about the Mustang's range. They are about to find out. At Luftwaffe fighter bases across Western Germany, the morning of October 12th unfolds with grim routine. Pilots attend briefings, ground crews arm and fuel aircraft, meteorology officers confirm what everyone can already see by looking at the sky. Clear weather. The Americans will come today. The only questions are where and in what strength. Hauptmann Heinz Knoke, a fighter pilot with Jagdgeschwader 11, records in his diary that morning his sense of foreboding. The American raids, he writes, are coming with greater frequency and in larger numbers. The defensive system is being overwhelmed not by superior tactics, but by simple mathematics. There are not enough German fighters to intercept all the American bombers, not enough pilots, not enough fuel, not enough ammunition. Knoke has been flying combat since 1940. He has 33 confirmed victories. He's an experienced pilot, a survivor, exactly the type of man the Luftwaffe desperately needs. But even veterans like Knoke can see the trajectory. The Americans are not trying to win battles. They are trying to exhaust the defender, and it is working. At 9:23 a.m., the air raid sirens begin wailing across Western Germany. The bomber stream has been detected by coastal radar. Estimated strength over 300 aircraft. Heading east, all available fighters are ordered to scramble immediately. Knoke and his squadron mates sprint to their aircraft. Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters, sleek and deadly, powered by Daimler-Benz engines, producing over 1,400 horsepower. These are excellent aircraft, flown by increasingly desperate men. The Bf 109 is fast, maneuverable, and heavily armed. But it is designed for short-duration interceptions, not extended combat. Its fuel capacity limits mission duration to roughly 90 minutes. That means German pilots must take off, climb to altitude, locate the bomber stream, attack, and land, all within an hour and a half. There is no margin for error, no second chances. Knoke's fighter lifts off at 9:31 a.m. Around him, the entire squadron is airborne. Within 4 minutes, 18 Bf 109s climbed steeply toward the bomber altitude of 25,000 feet. The autumn sky is crystalline, visibility unlimited. Condos, perfect conditions for combat, terrible conditions for the defender because the bombers can see their targets with perfect clarity. At 20,000 feet, Knoke spots them. The contrails appear first, long white lines scratched across the blue sky. Then the bombers themselves resolve into view. The sight makes his chest tighten. There are so many of them. The defensive boxes stretch for miles, layer upon layer of bombers flying in formations designed to maximize their defensive firepower. To attack them is to fly through a storm of machine gun fire. But attack they must. The bombers are targeting Münster, an important railway junction. If the Americans destroy the rail yards, the movement of men and material across Western Germany will be crippled for weeks. The bombers must be stopped. The mathematics of the situation allow no alternative. Knoke arms his weapons. One 20mm cannon firing through the propeller hub. Two 13mm machine guns in the cowling. He selects a bomber on the edge of the formation, slightly behind the others, and dives to attack. His airspeed increases rapidly. 300 miles per hour. 400. The bomber grows larger in his gun sight. He can see the individual windows, the gun turrets traversing to track his approach, the American star insignia on the wings. At 800 meters, he opens fire. The cannon shells arc toward the bomber, bright tracers marking their path. Some hit. He sees flashes on the bomber's wing. But the B-17 is a robust aircraft, designed to absorb tremendous battle damage. The bomber continues flying, its formation position unchanged. And then the return fire begins. The bomber's defensive guns open up. 50 caliber machine guns firing 800 rounds per minute. The tracers seem to float toward Knoke, deceptively slow until they flash past his canopy, faster than thought. He breaks left, diving away, heart pounding. That was one bomber. There are 300 more. The battle over Münster lasts 27 minutes. In that time, the 18 German fighters of Knoke's squadron made repeated attacks against the bomber stream. They managed to shoot down 4 B-17s, 4 bombers out of over 100 targeting Münster. In return, the German squadron loses 3 aircraft. 1 pilot was killed, 2 wounded. The mathematics are devastating. 3 German fighters destroyed to shoot down 4 bombers. But the Americans have 300 bombers and can afford to lose 12 or 15. The Germans have 18 fighters and cannot afford to lose 3. This same equation is playing out across Western Germany. At Schweinfurt, where the second wave of bombers attacked the ball-bearing factories, Luftwaffe fighters intercept in force 60 German fighters against 200 American bombers. The air battle is intense, vicious, and ultimately futile. The Germans shoot down 16 B-17s. They lose 21 fighters. The bombers that survive the fighters press onto the target and drop their bombs with devastating accuracy. 3 of the 5 major ball-bearing factories in Schweinfurt are heavily damaged. German ball-bearing production drops by 38% overnight. But the real catastrophe is not the factory damage. Factories can be repaired, production dispersed to other facilities. The real catastrophe is what happens on the ground at Luftwaffe bases across Germany while the air battle rages overhead. At approximately 10:45 a.m., while German fighters are engaged with the bomber streams, American P-47 Thunderbolts and the new P-51 Mustangs, freed from close escort duty, begin attacking German airfields. This is a new tactic, authorized only days earlier. American fighters are no longer restricted to defensive escort. They can hunt, they can strafe, they can destroy German aircraft on the ground where they are most vulnerable. The results are catastrophic for the Luftwaffe. At Vector Airfield, 12 Bf-109 fighters are caught during refueling operations. American Thunderbolts strafe the field in multiple passes. All 12 German fighters are destroyed or damaged beyond immediate repair. At Bad Lippspringe, 16 fighters preparing to launch for a second sortie are hit on the runway, 9 destroyed, 7 damaged. At Rhine, ammunition storage explodes under American strafing, destroying hangars and workshop facilities. The pattern repeats across dozens of airfields. German fighters returning from combat, low on fuel and ammunition, are attacked during landing. Pilots, exhausted from combat, must defend themselves against fresh American fighters who have been waiting for exactly this moment of maximum vulnerability. Some German pilots, seeing American fighters circling their own airfields, divert to alternate landing sites, only to find those fields under attack as well. By early afternoon, on October 12th, Luftwaffe fighter operations in Western Germany have effectively collapsed, not because German pilots lack courage or skill, but because they are overwhelmed by a tactical innovation they did not anticipate. The Americans are no longer simply defending bombers. They are actively destroying the defensive system itself, attacking not just aircraft, but airfields, fuel storage, pilots during their most vulnerable moments. That evening, preliminary casualty reports arrive at Luftwaffe headquarters in Berlin, October 12th, 1943. German fighter losses, 147 aircraft destroyed, another 63 damaged, requiring extensive repair. Pilot casualties, 41 dead, 33 wounded, 19 missing. In a single day, the Luftwaffe has lost the equivalent of 8 fighter squadrons. Oberst Rahl reads these numbers with growing horror. 147 fighters destroyed. This is not a battle. This is the systematic destruction of an air force, and the Americans' intelligence reports suggest are planning to return tomorrow. October 13th, the second day. The weather holds clear. At 8th Air Force headquarters in England, mission planners study reconnaissance photographs from yesterday's raids and prepare today's target list. The damage to Schweinfurt is substantial, but not complete. The ball-bearing factories are still producing, operating at reduced capacity, but operating nonetheless. A second strike is required, this time with even more aircraft. The bomber stream assembling over East Anglia on the morning of October 13th is larger than any previous American raid. 320 heavy bombers, B-17s and B-24s, every available aircraft. The fighter escort is reinforced. More P-47s, more of the new P-51 Mustangs, and a new tactic. Some fighters will escort the bombers all the way to the target. Others will range ahead, seeking out German fighters before they can assemble for attack. Still others will focus exclusively on airfield attacks. The Americans are no longer simply bombing Germany. They are fighting a coordinated air campaign designed to destroy the Luftwaffe's ability to resist. Every element of German air defense is targeted simultaneously. Aircraft, airfields, production facilities, fuel storage, transportation networks. It is strategic warfare conducted with industrial logic. Find the choke points, apply maximum pressure, collapse the system. On the German side, the situation on October 13th is approaching desperation. The fighter units that suffered casualties yesterday are still trying to reorganize. Replacement aircraft are being ferried from factories to frontline squadrons, but the logistics take time. Pilots who survived yesterday's combat are exhausted, some too shaken to fly. The squadrons that are operational have to cover for the squadrons that are not, and then at 7:15 a.m., the orders arrive from Berlin. Orders that will define everything that follows. 300 fighters currently defending Germany are to be withdrawn immediately and transferred east to support operations against the Soviet Union. The transfer is to begin within 24 hours, priority alpha, which means nothing, not weather, not operational requirements. Nothing takes precedence. The operations officers who receive these orders cannot believe what they are reading. The Americans have just conducted the largest daylight raid in history. They are clearly preparing to attack again today, probably with even more aircraft. And Berlin's response is to strip 300 fighters from the defense of Germany. It makes no tactical sense, no operational sense, no strategic sense, but the orders come from the very top, Hermann Göring himself, and Göring's orders come from Hitler. The Eastern Front is collapsing in multiple sectors. Soviet offensives are threatening to encircle entire German armies. Every available resource must be sent east, immediately, without delay, without exception. So the orders are executed. At fighter bases across Germany, squadron commanders are informed that half their strength will be transferred east within 24 hours. Pilots are told to prepare for relocation. Ground crews begin organizing the logistics of moving aircraft, fuel, spare parts, everything required to support fighter operations hundreds of miles away. And while this reorganization is happening, while fighter squadrons are being torn apart and reassembled, while command structures are being disrupted and logistics chains are being redirected, the American bombers come again. The air raid sirens begin at 9:02 a.m. on October 13th. For Hauptmann Heinz Knoke, standing in the dispersal area at his base, the sound triggers an immediate physical response. His hands are already moving toward his flight gear before his conscious mind has processed what he is hearing. Around him, other pilots are doing the same, running toward their aircraft, shouting to ground crews. The choreography of combat, rehearsed so many times, it has become automatic. But something is different this morning. Knoke notices it immediately. There are fewer aircraft. Yesterday morning, his squadron had 18 operational Bf-109s. This morning, there are 11. 7 fighters are missing, not destroyed, not damaged. Simply missing. Transferred to a staging area for relocation to the Eastern Front. His squadron commander, Major Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, stands beside the operations truck, his face rigid with suppressed fury. Knoke approaches. Him. Sir, we're under strength. Galland's voice is tight. The entire group is under strength. We're launching with 60% of normal strength. Those are our orders. 60%. Knoke does the mathematics in his head. If every fighter group defending Germany is at 60% strength, that means the defensive force facing today's American raid is almost half what it was yesterday. And yesterday was already inadequate. The Americans had broken through, hit their targets, and escaped with losses they could easily absorb. Today will be worse. The 11 fighters of Knoke's squadron take off at 9:18 a.m. They climb to intercept altitude, reforming into combat formation as they ascend. At 22,000 feet, Knoke's radio crackles with traffic from other squadrons. The reports are fragmentary but consistent. Large bomber formation, heading for Schweinfurt again. Fighter escorts are heavier than yesterday. American fighters are strafing airfields in advance of the bomber stream. Knoke feels cold certainty settling over him. The Americans have learned from yesterday. They are refining their tactics, applying lessons in real time. The Luftwaffe, by contrast, is being systematically weakened, stripped of strength at exactly the moment that strength is most needed. At 9:34 a.m., Knoke's squadron makes contact with the bomber stream. What he sees is worse than yesterday. The bomber formations seem to stretch forever, box after box of B-17s and B-24s, contrails painting the sky white, and surrounding them, like wolves circling prey, are American fighters, dozens of them. P-47 Thunderbolts at high altitude. And something new. Sleek, graceful fighters with distinctive belly radiators. P-51 Mustangs. Knoke has heard reports about these aircraft, but has never encountered one in combat. He is about to discover why they are feared. The squadron attacks from above, diving through the fighter screen toward the bombers. Knoke selects a target, a B-17 slightly out of position, and commits to his attack run. His cannon shells strike the bomber's wing root. He sees pieces fly off, but before he can press the attack, tracer fire flashes past his canopy. Someone is on his tail. He brakes hard left, pulling maximum Gs, the edges of his vision graying from the strain. The American fighter, a P-51, follows his turn. Knoke is an experienced pilot with hundreds of hours of combat flying, but this American is good, very good. The Mustang stays with him through the turn, getting closer. Knoke throws his Bf-109 into a series of violent maneuvers. Nothing works. The Mustang matches him, move for move. Finally, Knoke does the only thing left. He dives, full throttle, pushing his fighter toward the earth, using gravity to build speed. The Mustang cannot match. The American pursues for a few seconds, then breaks off. Knoke levels out at 8,000 feet, his aircraft shaking from the stress, his hands trembling on the controls. He has escaped, but he has also been driven away from the bombers, forced to abort his attack, rendered ineffective by a single enemy fighter. This is happening all across the sky. German fighters attack, American escorts intercept. The Germans are forced to fight their way through the fighter screen before they can ever reach the bombers. And every second spent fighting American fighters is a second not spent attacking bombers. The American tactics are brutally effective. They have turned the air battle into a war of attrition. They cannot lose. By 10:15 a.m., Knoke's squadron has been scattered. Individual fighters are trying to regroup, but the American fighters give them no peace. Every attempt to reform is disrupted by attacking P-47s or P-51s. The Germans are not losing this fight through lack of skill or courage. They are losing through numerical inferiority. For every German fighter, there are 4 or 5 American aircraft. The mathematics allow only one outcome. Knoke manages to make one more attack on the bombers before his fuel state forces him to disengage. He shoots down a B-17, watching it fall away, trailing smoke and fire. One bomber, a small victory. But around that burning B-17, 200 others continue toward their target, unharmed, unhindered. His victory is tactically meaningless. The flight back to base is tense. Knoke's fuel gauges show almost empty. He has perhaps 15 minutes of flying time remaining. But as he approaches his airfield, he sees smoke rising from the base. The field is under attack. American fighters are strafing in low-level passes, their machine guns ripping through anything that moves. Knoke has no choice. He cannot divert. He does not have the fuel to reach an alternate airfield. He must land here under fire or crash when his fuel runs out. He lines up for approach, landing gear extending, watching tracer fire arcing across the runway. 200 meters from touchdown, a P-47 Thunderbolt makes a strafing pass across his flight path. Knoke sees the muzzle flashes from the Americans' 8 machine guns. He feels impacts. His aircraft shudders. Something in the engine compartment is hit. Oil pressure dropping. Temperature rising. He touches down hard, the damaged landing gear collapsing on impact. His Bf-109 slides down the runway in a shower of sparks, grinding to a halt in the grass beside the concrete. Knoke unstraps, throws open the canopy, and runs. Behind him, his fighter is already burning. He makes it to a shelter trench and dives in, lying flat as the P-47 makes another pass, its guns tearing through the wreckage he just escaped from. The strafing attack continues for 11 minutes. When it finally ends, Knoke emerges to survey the damage. His squadron's dispersal area is devastated. 4 aircraft destroyed on the ground, 3 more damaged. The operations building is on fire. A fuel truck has been hit and is burning furiously, black smoke pouring into the clear autumn sky. Knoke walks among the wreckage, his flight suit torn, his face blackened with smoke. Of the 11 aircraft his squadron launched this morning, 5 have returned. 6 are missing. Some shot down, some crashed. At least 2 pilots are confirmed dead. The rest are unaccounted for. This is not warfare. This is extermination. And it is only the 2nd day. That evening, as Luftwaffe headquarters compiles casualty reports from October 13th, the numbers paint a picture of accelerating collapse. 237 fighters destroyed, 104 damaged, 73 pilots dead, 51 wounded, 37 missing. In 2 days, the Luftwaffe has lost nearly 400 fighters and over 160 pilots. But the crisis is not just the losses. The crisis is that even as these casualties mount, the transfer of 300 fighters to the Eastern Front continues. Aircraft that could replace the destroyed fighters are instead being sent east. Pilots who could fill the gaps left by casualties are being reassigned. The defense of Germany is being systematically dismantled at precisely the moment it faces its greatest test. Oberst Rahl, reading these reports in Berlin, understands with absolute clarity what is happening. The decision to strip fighters from the Western Front is not a tactical adjustment. It is a strategic catastrophe. The Americans have created a 72-hour window of opportunity, and German High Command has responded by widening that window into a chasm. October 14th, the third day. The weather still holds. At 8th Air Force Headquarters, intelligence officers note that German fighter resistance on October 13th was noticeably weaker than on October 12th. Fewer interceptions, less aggressive attacks, longer gaps between engagement. The oil campaign and the systematic destruction of Luftwaffe fighters are working. The defensive system is cracking. Today's mission is designed to shatter it completely. The target list is ambitious. Schweinfurt for the third consecutive day, Leipzig aircraft factories, Augsburg production facilities. Over 350 bombers will participate, the largest single raid yet attempted, and the fighter escort will be the strongest ever assembled. P-47 Thunderbolts, P-51 Mustangs, even some P-38 Lightnings. The Americans are committing everything they have. On the German side, October 14th begins with a sense of fatalistic resignation. The fighter squadrons that remain operational are exhausted. Pilots have been flying multiple sorties per day. Ground crews have been working around the clock to repair damaged aircraft. And now, with the transfer of fighters to the Eastern Front entering its second day, entire squadrons are being stripped from the order of battle. Hauptmann Knoke, assigned a replacement Bf-109 after his aircraft was destroyed yesterday, attends the morning briefing with what remains of his squadron. 7 pilots. 7. 3 days ago they had been 22. 15 men are gone, dead, wounded, missing, or transferred east. The squadron commander, Major Galland, looks like he has aged a decade in 3 days. When he speaks, his voice is hoarse with exhaustion. Gentlemen, we are being asked to do the impossible. The Americans are coming again, probably in greater strength than yesterday. Our forces are depleted. Command has nothing in reserve. Every available fighter is committed. We will launch, we will intercept, and we will do our duty. But I will not lie to you. The situation is desperate. Someone asks the question everyone is thinking. Sir, what about the fighters being transferred east? Can't they be retained for one more day? Galland's expression hardens. I asked that question. The answer from Berlin was unambiguous. The transfer continues. Nothing changes. The Eastern Front has priority. The room absorbs this in silence. The logic is insane. The Americans are destroying the Luftwaffe over Germany while German fighters are being sent to Russia. It is a strategic decision that defies every principle of military necessity. But it is not a decision these pilots can influence. They can only fly, fight, and hope to survive. At 9:47 a.m., Knoke's squadron intercepts the bomber stream 40 kilometers west of Schweinfurt. What he sees makes his breath catch. The bomber formations are even larger than yesterday, and the fighter escort is overwhelming. The sky is full of American fighters, circling the bombers in defensive orbits, stacked at different altitudes, covering every approach vector. The German fighters attack anyway. They have no choice. The bombers must be stopped. But the battle that follows is more slaughter than combat. The American fighters intercept the German attacks before they can reach the bombers. Dogfights erupt across miles of sky. Individual German fighters are swarmed by multiple American aircraft. The numerical advantage is so extreme that tactics become irrelevant. The Americans can afford to trade losses. The Germans cannot. Knoke makes 3 attempts to break through to the bombers. Each time, he is driven off by American fighters. On his 3rd attempt, his wingman is shot down by a P-51. Knoke sees the parachute open. A white flower blooming against the blue sky. At least the pilot survived. But survived for what? To become a prisoner? To sit out the rest of the war in a camp while his country burns? By 11:08 a.m., the fuel gauges in Knoke's Bf 109 show critical levels. He must disengage or risk flaming out over Germany with no chance of reaching a friendly airfield. He breaks off and heads for base, alone. Around him, scattered across 100 kilometers of sky, the air battle continues. But it is a battle the Germans have already lost. The bombers are getting through, the defenses are collapsing. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Knoke lands at 11:23 a.m. The base has been hit again. More damage, more fires. The maintenance hangars are partially destroyed. A crater from a 500-pound bomb has torn through the center of the runway, forcing him to land on a taxiway. As he climbs from his cockpit, a ground crew chief approaches with a message. Major Galland is dead, shot down 30 minutes ago. His parachute failed to open. The squadron commander, the man who held the unit together through 3 days of hell, is gone. The news spreads through the surviving pilots like a physical blow. Galland was a veteran, a skilled pilot, a leader. If he could be killed, anyone could be killed. No amount of experience or skill or determination mattered when you were outnumbered 5-1 by fighters that were just as capable as your own. By early afternoon on October 14th, the American bombers have hit their targets and turned for home. Behind them, Schweinfurt is burning again. The ball-bearing factories that survived the first 2 raids have been struck once more. Production will drop by another 20%. Leipzig and Augsburg have also been hit. German aircraft production will decline. Ball-bearing supplies will contract. The industrial machinery that keeps the Luftwaffe flying is being systematically destroyed. But far more significant than the factory damage is what has happened to the Luftwaffe itself over the past 72 hours. The final casualty reports for October 14th show 219 fighters destroyed, 91 damaged, 68 pilots killed, 43 wounded, 28 missing. In 3 days, from October 12th through October 14th, the Luftwaffe has lost approximately 600 fighters and over 250 pilots, 600 aircraft. That number represents more than 1/4 of the entire German fighter force. And it is not simply the numbers. It is who was lost. Squadron commanders like Major Galland, experienced pilots with dozens of victories, men who understood how to survive against overwhelming odds, men whose knowledge died with them. The replacement pilots arriving at depleted squadrons have none of this experience. They have 80 or 90 hours of flight training. They have never seen combat. They are terrified teenagers being thrown into battles against veterans. Most will be dead within a month. The institutional knowledge that kept the Luftwaffe functional is being destroyed faster than it can be rebuilt. And while this catastrophe unfolds, 300 frontline fighters continue their transfer to the Eastern Front. The aircraft leave Germany, fly east, and enter a completely different war against Soviet forces. The defense of Germany is left to what remains, and what remains is grossly inadequate. On October 15th, the weather breaks. Heavy overcast moves across northern Europe, grounding both American and German aircraft. The 72-hour window has closed. The Americans return to their bases in England to assess results and plan future operations. The Germans begin the grim work of counting their losses and trying to rebuild shattered squadrons. Oberst Raul, in his office at Luftwaffe headquarters, prepares a detailed analysis of the October battles for senior command. His report is blunt, to the point of insubordination. The decision to transfer fighters east during the American offensive, he writes, was strategically incomprehensible. It weakened German defenses at the moment of maximum enemy pressure. It handed the Americans air superiority over the Reich. It guaranteed that future raids would face even less resistance. Raul's report recommends immediate suspension of all fighter transfers until the Western air defense system can be reconstituted. He recommends emergency expansion of pilot training programs. He recommends prioritization of fighter production over all other aircraft types. He recommends concentration of defensive forces around critical industrial targets rather than attempting to defend everything everywhere. His recommendations are logical, sensible, and utterly futile. The response from higher command is curt. The transfer of fighters to the Eastern Front serves strategic imperatives that cannot be explained in operational reports. The decision stands. No changes will be made. The defense of Germany will continue with available resources. Roll reads this response and understands that the Luftwaffe has entered a death spiral from which it cannot escape. The losses are unsustainable. The replacement system is inadequate. The training pipeline is broken, and command decisions are being driven by factors that have nothing to do with military reality. The war in the air over Germany is being lost not through enemy action alone, but through self-inflicted strategic incompetence. For Hauptmann Heinz Knoke and the other surviving pilots, the aftermath of the 72-hour battle is a period of numb exhaustion. His squadron, which began October 12th with 18 aircraft and 22 pilots, ended October 14th with 4 operational aircraft and 7 pilots. 15 men gone in 3 days. The squadron is reconstituted with replacements. Young pilots, fresh from training schools, teenagers with terrified eyes and inadequate skills. Knoke tries to teach them what they need to know: how to survive an attack by American fighters, how to break through a fighter screen to reach the bombers, how to manage fuel and ammunition, how to land a damaged aircraft. But there is no time. The replacements arrive, receive perhaps 1 day of orientation, and are thrown into combat. Most die quickly. A few survive long enough to learn. Those few become the next generation of veterans. But there are never enough of them. The 72-hour battle in October 1943 marked a turning point in the air war over Europe. The Americans had demonstrated that they could conduct sustained strategic bombing despite Luftwaffe resistance. They had proven that their escort fighters could protect bomber formations deep into Germany, and they had shown that aggressive tactics targeting not just industrial facilities, but the defensive system itself could yield decisive results. More importantly, the battle revealed the consequences of German strategic choices. The decision to strip 300 fighters from Western air defense during the American offensive was not an isolated mistake. It was symptomatic of a larger problem. German high command was fighting multiple wars simultaneously and lacked the resources to fight any of them adequately. Choices had to be made. Priorities had to be set. And the priority in October 1943 was the Eastern Front. The strategic logic was not entirely irrational. The Soviet Union represented an existential threat. If the Eastern Front collapsed, Soviet armies would march to Berlin. By contrast, even if the Americans achieved air superiority over Germany, they could not invade the Reich from the air alone. They would need ground forces, amphibious operations, months or years of preparation. So, from a purely strategic perspective, reinforcing the East made sense. But this logic ignored a critical factor. Strategic bombing was not simply destroying factories. It was destroying the industrial capacity that supplied all fronts. Every ball-bearing factory damaged in Schweinfurt meant fewer bearings for tanks fighting in Russia. Every aircraft plant hit in Leipzig meant fewer fighters available for Eastern Front operations. The Americans were not attacking Germany in isolation. They were attacking the source that fed all of Germany's military efforts. By weakening Western air defenses to reinforce the East, German command created a situation where both fronts became weaker. The 300 fighters transferred east provided temporary relief to ground operations in Russia, but the unchallenged American bombers that those fighters might have intercepted destroyed production facilities that would have supplied equipment for those same Eastern Front operations in the months ahead. It was a strategic trade-off that sacrificed long-term capability for short-term relief. And in an industrial war, long-term capability determines outcomes. The Americans understood this. Their strategic bombing campaign was designed not to win battles, but to erode industrial capacity over time. Every factory damaged was a blow to future German strength. Every production line disrupted meant fewer weapons in months to come. The campaign was patient, systematic, and devastatingly effective. The 72 hours in October were just one phase of this larger campaign. But they were a significant phase because they demonstrated to both sides what was now possible. The Americans could strike deep into Germany, hit critical targets, and escape with losses they could absorb. The Germans could resist, inflict casualties, but not prevent. The attacks. The trajectory was clear. Unless something fundamentally changed, unless Germany could rebuild its air defenses faster than they were being destroyed, the outcome was inevitable. Nothing fundamental changed. The pattern established in October repeated through November, December into 1944. American raids grew larger, German losses mounted, replacement pilots arrived with less training and died more quickly. The industrial targets that sustained the German war machine were systematically destroyed. The Luftwaffe fought on, but it fought with diminishing resources against an enemy whose resources seemed limitless. By June 1944, when Allied forces invaded Normandy, the Luftwaffe was a shadow of what it had been in October 1943. On D-Day, German fighters flew barely 300 sorties against over 14,000 Allied sorties. The Air Force that had once dominated European skies could not even contest the invasion of its own occupied territory. The reasons were complex, but they traced back to battles like the 72 hours in October, battles where losses exceeded replacement capacity, battles where strategic decisions compounded tactical defeats, battles where mathematics proved more decisive than courage. Hauptmann Heinz Knoke survived the war. He flew his last combat mission in March 1945, by which time fuel shortages made sustained operations impossible. His final diary entry as a combat pilot reads simply, "We have lost, not because we lacked courage, not because we lacked skill. We lost because they had more of everything. More aircraft, more fuel, more pilots, more factories to build, more of everything. Courage cannot defeat arithmetic." Oberst Gunther Rauhl also survived. After the war, he was interrogated extensively by American intelligence officers about Luftwaffe operations and strategic decisions. When asked about the October 1943 battles and the simultaneous transfer of fighters to the Eastern Front, his response was unequivocal. "That decision lost us the war in the air over Germany. We were fighting for survival in the West, and command stripped our strength at the critical moment. The Americans broke through. They never looked back. Every raid after October was easier for them and harder for us. Mathematics became unsolvable." The interrogating officer pressed him. Surely there were other factors: production capacity, training quality, strategic bombing effectiveness. Rauhl nodded. All of those mattered. But they mattered because October showed the Americans they could win. They saw us weakened. They saw their tactics working. They scaled up their offensive, and we could never recover the balance. If we had kept those 300 fighters in Germany, if we had concentrated our defense, instead of dividing our strength, we might have held for months longer, maybe long enough for other factors to change the equation. We'll never know. The decision was made. The fighters went east. The West was lost. The 72-hour battle and its aftermath illustrate a fundamental truth about modern warfare. In conflicts between industrial nations, resource allocation decisions often matter more than tactical execution. The German pilots who fought in October 1943 were skilled, courageous, and determined. They flew excellent aircraft. They used sophisticated tactics. They achieved local victories. But they lost the strategic campaign because their high command made a resource allocation decision that could not be overcome. Through tactical excellence, the Americans, conversely, made strategic decisions that maximized their advantages. They concentrated their bombing campaign on choke points in German production. They refined their tactics to target not just factories, but the defensive system protecting those factories. They sustained their offensive through losses that would have crippled a less industrially capable nation, and they did all of this while simultaneously fighting a war in the Pacific, supplying the Soviet Union through Lend-Lease, and preparing for eventual amphibious invasion of Europe. The scale of American industrial mobilization was unprecedented. In 1943 alone, the United States produced over 85,000 aircraft. Germany produced less than 25,000. This 3-to-1 advantage in production meant the Americans could afford to lose aircraft at rates that would be catastrophic for Germany. They could experiment with tactics, absorb failures, and iterate towards success. Germany had no such luxury. Every loss was permanent. Every mistake was costly. Every failed defense brought the next American raid closer to unopposed success. The ball-bearing factories in Schweinfurt provide a case study in strategic bombing effectiveness. Ball bearings are essential components in almost all mechanical systems. Tanks, aircraft, submarines, even small arms require precision bearings. Germany produced roughly half its ball bearings in Schweinfurt. The 3 raids in October 1943 damaged production capacity by over 60%. This single outcome rippled through the entire German war machine. Aircraft production slowed because engines required bearings. Tank production was reduced because transmissions required bearings. The Kriegsmarine struggled to maintain U-boats because propeller shafts required bearings. One city, one type of factory, 3 raids, and the entire German military-industrial complex was degraded. This was strategic bombing at its most effective. Not terror bombing of cities, not indiscriminate destruction. Precise strikes on critical nodes that affected everything downstream. The Luftwaffe understood what was happening. Operational reports from late 1943 and early 1944 are filled with warnings about unsustainable loss rates, inadequate replacement training, and strategic resource allocation failures. But understanding a problem does not mean you can solve it. Germany lacked the industrial capacity to simultaneously fight the Soviet Union, defend against strategic bombing, maintain U-boat warfare in the Atlantic, and prepare for inevitable invasion in the West. Choices had to be made, and every choice meant weakening one front to support another. The decision to transfer fighters east in October 1943 was just one such choice. It made sense from an Eastern Front perspective. Those 300 fighters provided badly needed air support for ground operations. They helped stabilize local situations. They achieved tactical successes. But the strategic cost was the loss of Western air defense. At a critical moment, the Americans achieved air superiority that they never relinquished. And that air superiority enabled everything that followed: unrestricted bombing of German industry, destruction of transportation networks, interdiction of fuel supplies, eventually close air support for the Normandy invasion and the subsequent march to Berlin. One decision: 300 fighters, 72 hours in October. The consequences cascaded for the remaining 18 months of the war. For the individual pilots who fought through those 72 hours, the experience was transformative. They had entered the battle believing that skill and determination could overcome numerical inferiority. They left understanding that modern warfare had changed. Individual excellence mattered far less than systemic capacity. A mediocre pilot in an adequate aircraft, backed by unlimited resources, would defeat an ace in an excellent aircraft who lacked fuel, ammunition, and replacement parts. This was a bitter lesson. It negated everything they had been taught about warrior virtues, but it was true. Nonetheless, the American pilots who fought in October 1943 learned different lessons. They learned that sustained pressure worked, that the enemy could be worn down through attrition, that numerical superiority, properly applied, was decisive. These lessons shaped American air doctrine for the remainder of the war and beyond. The United States Air Force's approach to strategic bombing, developed and refined through battles like the October 72 Hours, became the template for air power theory for generations. In the decades after World War II, military historians debated whether strategic bombing had been decisive in Germany's defeat. Some argued that the ground campaigns in Russia and Western Europe were more important. Others pointed to naval blockades and resource shortages. But few disputed that the air campaign over Germany, particularly from late 1943 onward, had significantly degraded German military capacity. The 72 hours in October 1943 represented the moment when the air campaign transitioned from experimental to decisive. Before October, strategic bombing was contested. Its effectiveness was debated. Its costs seemed high relative to its achievements. After October, the trajectory was clear. The Americans could hit Germany at will. The Luftwaffe could resist but not prevent. German industry would be systematically destroyed. The only question was how long it would take. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.